Hello. The purpose of this video is to help you understand how to price an option without getting into any complicated mathematics. Firstly, let's start with the basic question. What is a call option? Since we won't be using math, it is important to get the definition right. A call option gives the buyer of the option the right but not the obligation to buy an underlying asset at an agreed strike price at some agreed time in the future. Let's assume that the underlying asset is a stock, like IBM, that trades on the New York Stock Exchange. When the option expires, the buyer of the call option can choose to exercise the option. This means that she buys the underlying stock from the seller of the option at the pre-agreed strike price. The seller of the option, on the other hand, does not have any choice. He will have to sell the underlying asset if the buyer chooses to exercise the option. This payoff is asymmetric because the buyer has the right but not the obligation whether or not to exercise the option, and will only do so if the terms are favorable to her. As a result, the seller will only enter into the contract if the buyer pays him an amount upfront. This amount is the option premium. Let's consider an example. The underlying stock currently trades at $100. This is also known as the spot price of the underlying. A call option has a strike price of $100, which is the same as the spot price. The option expires in 1 year. The buyer of this call option will have the right but not the obligation to buy the underlying stock at strike price of $100 when the option expires in 1 year. How much would you be willing to pay for this call option? Let's assume that you pay $5 for the call option, and consider different scenarios at the end of 1 year. In the first scenario, the underlying spot goes up to $130 at the end of 1 year. Since the price of the underlying at maturity is higher than the strike price of $100, you would choose to exercise the option. You then buy the underlying from the seller at $100, and immediately sell it on the exchange for $130. You realize a gain of $30 by exercising the option and selling the underlying to the market at a higher price. However, you have already paid $5 for the option 1 year ago. So your net profit is $30 minus $5, which is $25. In the second scenario, the underlying spot falls to $80 at the end of 1 year. Since the price of the underlying at maturity is lower than the strike price of $100, you would choose to not exercise the option. As with scenario 1, you have already paid $5 upfront as the option premium, hence your net loss is $5. However, if you had bought the underlying stock directly 1 year ago, you would have lost $20. When you buy an option, your loss is limited to the option premium that you pay.
In the next part, we will take a quick look at the Black-Scholes model. The Black-Scholes is a pricing model used to determine the theoretical value for an option. Today, most professional traders and investment banks use pricing tools that are based on the Black-Scholes model. The Black-Scholes model assumes that the underlying asset behaves like a random walk, which is another way of describing how a drunk person tries to walk in a straight line. On the first step, he could stumble left, or he could stumble right. After the first step, he could again stumble left, or right, from his new position. How he takes the second step is not affected by how he took the first step. These are known as independent events. Each step represents how the underlying stock could move in 1 day. Let's look at the first 3 steps. How many paths will lead to point A? Only one path leads to point A. How many paths will lead to point B? 1, 2, 3. There are 3 paths that can lead point B. The same applies for points C and D. There are more paths that will lead to endpoints which are closer to the starting point. The model predicts that it is more likely for the stock to end up at price near the initial price, than one far away. Let's make two more assumptions. 1. Each step represents one day where the stock can move up or down, and 2. A stock can either move by only $1 each day. We can see that the more steps there are, the more likely that the stock may end up at very high or low price. Let's recap what we have covered so far. 1. A call option gives the buyer the right, but not the obligation, to buy an underlying asset at the strike price, at some point in future. 2. The Black-Scholes model is used to price options, and there's possibly a drunk person hiding inside.
Now that we have a good idea of how the Black-Scholes models the behavior of the underlying asset, let's look at what factors affect an option's price. 1. The strike price relative to the spot price. 2. The time to maturity. 3. Volatility of the underlying. 4. The forward, which can be broken down to interest rates, and dividends. We'll look at each of these factors in detail. Consider our earlier example of a one-year option, where the underlying spot is $100, and the strike is also $100. We'll stick with the same premium of $5. When the strike is the same as the spot, we refer to the strike as at the money. Now consider a second option, where the only difference is that the strike is at $110 instead of $100. When the strike is higher than the spot, for a call option, we refer to the strike as out of the money. Here's an easy way to remember the terms. If the OTM call option expires today, and the stock price is at $100, the buyer would not exercise the option to buy the stock at $110 when he can buy it on the exchange for $100. So the strike is out of the money. Here's an easy way to remember the terms. If the OTM call option expires today, and the stock price is at $100, the buyer would not exercise the option to buy the stock at $110 when he can buy it on the exchange for $100. So the strike is out of the money.